applying for grants through the Hispanic Fund. I'm going to introduce Albert Calo right now. He's the chairman, president of the Hispanic Fund, and he'd like to say a few words.
Hi, everyone. Hey, thanks so much for joining today. You know, we're pretty excited about obviously the technology that we're able to reach out to some folks that maybe in some cases we weren't able to reach out to before. And the purpose of today's session is to really draw attention to some of the benefits that the Hispanic Fund has in regards to grant requesting. So last year we had a little bit of a downturn in applications. We're not sure why we didn't have as many applications last year as normal, but you know we are always looking to help additional organizations within the community that are able and follow the guidelines that we have set aside to be able to grant money to. And so really what this is an introduction to assisting those organizations into being able to do that. You know, anything that we can do to help facilitate that, you know, we really appreciate. And so you have a lot of folks on the call here who are part of the organization of the Community Foundation and the Hispanic Fund as well. So please take advantage. You're going to have a lot of time and the ability to ask questions, but the information that's going to be gone over today should help you out and help guide you to being able to receive some grant monies when our grant committee meets for that specific purpose. So thank you very much, Rachel. I appreciate it. So I'll turn this back over to you.
We would like to introduce David now from Candid. He is going to go on with the presentation, and if we have any questions, there'll be somebody there that can help us out.
All right, thanks very much, Rachel. Hi, my name's Dave Holmes, and I'm with Candid, and I'm going to do a few logistical things right at the beginning here. I'm going to mute you all, except for me, and then what we're going to do is, if you have a question throughout the presentation, please do send it in through the chat, and then we'll have my co-worker, Sam Petticord, unmute herself and ask the question for you. We'll also have some time at the very end to do a little bit of discussion of any of the questions that you might have related to this. So I'm going to move on and tell you a little bit about our organization. So this is me. This is Sam. We're both on the call together. If you don't know who Candid is, we've been around for over 60 years, but we've been known as the Foundation Center. Foundation Center has been collecting information on private philanthropy, has been making sure that people know how to write grants and find grant opportunities throughout the country for many, many years. Just last year, we merged with another organization called GuideStar. And GuideStar collects information on nonprofits and shares it through their database, so you can share your information on your organization through GuideStar's website. And I encourage you to take advantage of that. But what we do, both of us, is try to make sure that you can find the information that you need. So we do research, we collaborate, we have a database called the Foundation Directory, which is available throughout the community, including in 3 locations in Lorain County that Sam will tell you about a little bit later on. But throughout, I want you to know that we are trying to be as responsive as possible, especially in this situation. I want to thank you. We would normally do a program like this live. So we are hoping that you will keep paying attention to the resources that we have. We have a wonderful website that specifically talks about our COVID-19 responses and has a lot of details on some of the funding, including the Community Foundation's funding and some of the other funding that happens nationwide. So that's always changing and being updated. We're going to continue to do what we do all the time, is try and help you find funding opportunities and try and understand the funding opportunities that are out there. So that's our funding for coronavirus resources website. I'm not going to go into detail on it, but if you do want to take a look at it, it's free. It has a lot of information. So that's my commercial for the day. I want to thank Cindy and the rest of the staff at the Community Foundation and Albert for having me here to talk about what we do. And what we do is help people write grant proposals. And the Hispanic Fund application is a grant proposal, just like many of the other ones that we work with people in helping them try to find out how to fill out. So this is going to be a kind of a two-part program. The first part of the program is going to be about writing a grant proposal and just a little catch up if you've never done it before, or if it's something that you don't do very regularly, just to kind of make sure that you're on the same page as most funders with what they want. Then the second part of this is really going to go through the Hispanic Fund application completely and make sure that you know the kind of things that you will be asked and how the things that are standard to most grant proposals fit in with that. So please do submit your questions by chat as I'm talking, and then I'll stop it a couple times just to see if there's any other questions or anything else that somebody wants to say. So thanks a lot. So this is how we concentrate. We make sure that people understand what funders really want to know. And that's the way that we look at any grant proposal. I used to work as a program officer. I actually worked for the Stocker Foundation in Lorain County. And I saw a lot of grant proposals, and I always had a number of questions. And that usually they came about because things were not explained in the way that I, as somebody who worked for a funder, needed to know about. So that's what this is about, is understanding what funders really want to know and saying it when you are in your grant proposal, when you're writing your material. We're getting a little background sound, so if some y'all can make sure you're muted, please go ahead and do that. I'm going to pause just a second to mute everybody again. Okay, there we go. So, what funders really want to know? Well, the first thing that a funder wants to know is always what need you're addressing. And it isn't so much the need of your organization that they want to focus on. It's the need that you are responding to in the community. So if you think about how you would say that, we are working to make sure that every child receives a lunch. Every child in our community doesn't go hungry. Every child in Lorain or in Amherst or in Elyria is getting the kind of services that they need. When you talk about a need, it's tempting to want to just talk about, you know, I need to buy this. I need a whole lot of money right now. I need to make sure that I get my budget fulfilled this year. But that's not really what a funder is wanting to look at. They want to know specifically, who are you helping? So the more detail you can have on the need of the community, how many people are in your community? How many kids will you be serving with your program? How many people are going to get meals? The more details you have on exactly what need you're addressing, the better off you're going to be. You don't want to say something like, well, you know, poverty is a nationwide issue and we're going to do something about that. That's not what a local funder, a funder that's worried about your community needs to know. They need to know, what is the poverty situation? What is the problem in your particular area? That need is what you base everything else on. And by the way, one of the handouts that was sent to you from Rachel is a handout that enables you to outline your particular program. It's a little blank outline that you can fill in with different parts. And I'm going to show you where those parts will go in the Hispanic Fund application. So let's imagine that you've been very clear about explaining what the need is and the number of people that are going to be served. The next thing, of course, is to talk about what you're going to be doing to serve them, to address them. And that's usually what we call the program description or something like the project. But it doesn't matter what it's called. The important thing is it has to be something that you can achieve. It has to be something that you know what's going to happen at the end. So you don't start out by just saying, here, first we're going to do this, next we're going to do this, third we're going to do that. You start out by saying, what are the outcomes? What are the measurable things I'm going to achieve? Because later on, you're going to have to say how to measure those outcomes, how to measure what you wanted to get out of this particular program, to measure your achievement. Your outcomes have to be measurable either with something as simple as a test, something as simple as checking on the effectiveness of what you do. And it can't just be, though you would want to do this, it can't just be counting. I'm not going to go into logic models or anything complicated here, but there's a difference between an output, which is the number of times you do something, or the number of people that show up at something, versus an outcome, which is a change that you make, a change in the way that those people act, a change in their state. They're now fed, they're now able to move on. They can now read and go on and do what they need to do. So you need to think about the outcomes that you're trying to achieve when you talk about your project. Then, if you have a good sense of what your outcomes are going to be, you can then talk about the strategies, the timeline, from the beginning to the end. And it's different all the time. A lot of funders and a lot of programs tend to think in terms of a year because, you know, you have to give it out a certain amount of money per year. Maybe you can only apply once a year. But within a year, or within the time that it's going to take, a school year or summer, what is going to happen? Tell me from the beginning to end what the project is, and tell me the different steps that it has. So I know you're going to go for these particular outcomes, but I want to know that you know how that's going to work, that you know of exactly who's going to do the work. Maybe you're going to be working with another organization. Maybe you're going to be relying on another organization to help you do that work. You don't want to just set out and say, well, we're going to do this as soon as we make a good relationship with a school and a senior center and a hospital. If you are working with those people, you want to be very clear, this is something that you are already planning to do, that you've already established the connections. Nothing is a quicker rejection of a grant proposal than a statement that is something like, well, we hope to work with X and we hope to work with Y. Anybody who's reading your grant proposal wants to know that you have done the groundwork, that you've built a relationship. And the Hispanic Fund application has a clear part where you can share that, and they require you to share information that proves this is really happening. You never want to say, oh yeah, I'm working with them, without actually having talked to them first. So that's the kind of thing that is important. A funder, where you work, who's going to be doing this, and how is it going to function? They want to see that each of the steps has been thought through. You have to get additional staff. If you have to get equipment, you want to put that in your plan so it's clear. If I was reading this, I would understand how the project was going to work from the start of it to the end. It's like a timeline. It's essentially every part of it should be in there. So if you talk about your need, the people that you're helping, you talk about what you're going to do to help them, then you're going to talk about how you're going to measure that success. And most of the time people think pretty simply about this. They think, well, you know, I was going to make sure that these kids got fed. So I'm going to count the number of kids that got fed. I'm going to talk about the nutrition that they received. I measured it at the beginning and they weren't getting fed. I'll measure it at the end and they are getting fed. I'm done. But it's not just about measuring what happens at the end. It's also about keeping track of how well it goes. If you've ever done a program where you have to travel from one place to another in order to provide that service, you want to make sure that you check every day that that service is provided, that the transportation was working, because it doesn't always work that way. Things break down. Transportation services aren't always up to date. Maybe you thought they were coming or they had something wrong with the calendar. You have to have a way of measuring the success, a way to monitor the success of the program as it goes on. So when I read a section and I read about how you're going to evaluate the success of the program, I look both for the ways you're going to evaluate the endpoint of the program and the ways you're going to evaluate how the program is going on. You have regular meetings, maybe you keep track of things, you have a daily attendance. Those are the things that are also important as you go through this. And you don't know, there are a lot of people who think you need to be a statistician or an expert in order to do this. But what you need to know is to know your program and to know what you consider to be the success and what you've based that on. If you can share that, you can talk about how to measure that success. Other things that are often asked in grant proposals, this one is very simple. Why are you the best organization to do it? Why should your organization be the one that has this project and that does it? Now, a lot of you may have a long history of providing service to the community. You've been in Lorain for a very long time. You've been in Lorain County and have served. Maybe people even recognize your name. You know, you're part of the community. Everybody knows the name of your organization. Everybody knows what you do. But that doesn't guarantee that you're going to get funding. You have to be able to say, why should it be you? Program. Why does our organization qualify to do it? Well, we've worked with large groups of people before. We've been feeding people in the community for 25 years. We've been working and providing after school programs for X number of times. Tell me about what makes you so great. I may already know it, but I don't necessarily know it in this context. In the same way, if you're brand new, you might feel like you're in trouble. And one of the things that this Hispanic Fund application and some of the other community foundation applications are, they're working with small organizations or new organizations. That's perfectly reasonable. Just because you're a new organization or small doesn't mean you can't be in equal competition for the same amounts of money. What you need to be able is to explain what makes you great as a new organization or as a small organization. Are you nimble enough to change? Are you small and responsive to the community? Do you have people on your board or in your organization that have been tied into the community for a long time and so know maybe better than some of the other organizations exactly how to serve a particular neighborhood or particular city? Tell me about that. It's your opportunity to brag about what makes you so great. So you absolutely want to do that. And it works for older organizations, it works for newer organizations. What makes you worthy of investment? And the last main thing that's part of a grant proposal, after you've talked about the need and the programs you're going to do and how you're going to measure that success and why it should be you that does it, you have to be able to say, well, how am I going to pay for it? It isn't always that you get all the money that you need from a foundation. In fact, it's very unlikely for any project that you get all the money that you need for a particular program. Different funds give different amounts of money. Sometimes it's a really tiny program and it could be fully funded, but most of the time you're combining this with other sources. So tell me what those are. You're going to be required as part of this to talk in your budget with numbers and this show where is all the money coming from for this project, but also talk about what your plans are. So here's where we're going to get the money to do this year. We're going to get some money hopefully from the Hispanic Fund. We're going to get some money, hopefully from these other foundations. We're going to get some money from individuals. We're going to charge for certain services. Give me the picture. And then tell me what your plan is for the future, because I don't want to give you money and then as soon as I stop giving you money, maybe I give you this year and you don't get any next year, you're just going to stop the program. That's not normal. That's not usually what people are doing. Some projects, if you're doing a building or a renovation project or making a change in a particular thing, might have a 1-year kind of expiration date and it's over when it's done. But most of the time, you have to think about sustainability. I want to invest in the programs that are most sustainable. So that's the key to what we're talking about here. Those main parts are what leads me to talk about the Hispanic Fund. And I'm going to just go up here and ask Sam if there are any questions that have come in yet.
Not yet.
Okay, all right, we're going to go on. But please do send in your questions through chat or ask them at the very end. Thanks. All right, going back to this. This is the Hispanic Fund, and I have used the PDF of the Hispanic Fund application that I was supplied with. And so I'm going to go through most of it on this particular program. And it's not, you're going to notice that a couple of things are missing. The essentials are in there. So I want to make sure you don't miss out on them. So that's the first page. Everybody knows that. This into detail on the mission of this Hispanic. It's very important when you read an application like this This is a very good example of what I would call the textbook grant application, because it's going to tell you what the mission is and why it exists. And it's going to give you those priority areas, the funding areas that they care most about. When I am trying to decide, if I was deciding who gets the grant, I would look to see where is the match between what I am doing as part of the Hispanic Fund, and what you are doing. Is it a specific public safety program? Is it a project that addresses the root causes of social ills within the Hispanic community? If you can't figure out where it fits, then maybe it doesn't fit. You have to think, how do I make this fit? How do I see or explain to somebody reading this how it does within these priority funding areas? That's a question on this grant proposal, so you need to think about that. You also need to pay attention to this, and this is a long list, and of course, it isn't all, I'm going to say right off the bat that this is the way that it's precluded for this particular fund, and not necessarily for every fund that you're ever going to see. But you have to consider, if you're going to be sending in an application, if what you're doing is really something that is for religious purposes, you're not going to be able to use this fund specifically for that. Additionally, if you are thinking about to reduce debt or to do medical research, this is not the for you. You don't want to have to try and do a whole lot of work on your grant proposal without getting any kind of look at it. You don't want to waste your time, so do this. If you have a question about it, there's of course going to be lots of places where you can find out. You see on this next page, or next of the proposal, that, oops, I'm sorry, one too far, that you can contact the Community Foundation. Call Rachel directly and ask her a question. You can get in touch with them. You can find out if there's any other problems that you're having, who you can talk to. There's an email address, phone number. We'll give you the website at the very end. The most important thing to do is don't guess. Don't ask me. I've had that in the past when I've been working for Candid, and people come in and say, what did they mean by that on this application? I'm like, I'm not sure exactly what they mean. I tell you what they generally mean, but I don't know until I talk to them. So if you have a specific question, make sure that you ask it. And the other guidelines, you want to make sure you follow the guidelines as closely as possible, because you don't want to make it easy for somebody to say no. Well, they asked for this and they didn't follow any of the directions. They didn't answer half the questions. That's an easy way to say no. Don't make it easy for anybody to throw out your application.
David, if I could interject something. So this is what you just pointed out is fantastic. I appreciate that. One of the things that we've had in the past, we've had organizations apply for a grant. And while we all know, because we're so closely tied to the community, we all know that some of these organizations are so worthwhile. Unfortunately, we've had to turn down organizations because they don't give us enough information or haven't asked for the proper funding for what they're doing. And it hurts us to our heart because we've had to turn some of these organizations down. So that list that you had previously, you know, we don't give monies for transportation and some of these other things. Yeah, so this list is key in helping us understand why we should give your organization money. And so it makes a lot of difference for us when we're reviewing all these grant applications as to, if we're going to get that granular, sometimes it comes down to where some organizations are so close in their request, and the information they provided is fantastic, but we give it to one organization over another because of the information that they gave us. Okay, so that's the one thing that I do want to point out. I think, we're Latinos, so we get very emotional when it comes to some organization that has asked for money, and it just rips us apart when we're not able to grant that money because of, some clerical information that we need. So this is extremely important. So I appreciate you showing this first.
All right, thank you, Albert. That's a great point. And don't make it easy. Don't not follow directions. Don't skip over something. A lot of people will tell me, you know, I don't want to check in. I don't want to ask them, because if I ask them, then I'll know for certain that it wasn't something I should apply for. Well, you don't want to find out when, after you work really hard, write a grant proposal, and then you get rejected because of something very simple. So this is all the preliminary stuff for this Hispanic Foundation. This is a little bit that's specifically for the program staff, and I just put it up here because I want you to notice that it says, if the agency received grant funding last year, did they submit a grant report? One of my jobs as program officer for the Stalker Foundation was making a lot of phone calls to organizations saying, look, you can't apply for this grant unless you turn in a report for the last amount of money that we gave you. And you would be surprised at the number of people who just can't get that together. It's, if you haven't submitted a report and you've gotten funding before, make sure that you do that. All right, so we're getting into the meat of it. And if you see these things at the very bottom in italics are things that I've already talked about, but I want you to see where they fit in. So this is the organization and project description, very basic stuff there. But down there is the organization's mission, history, and population served. Notice also the character limit. That is always an issue when I am writing grant proposals, is the character limit. And I have gotten so mad at some organizations because I've had 10,000 characters worth of great, beautiful language that I've had to say, oh, I got to cut this up. I got to shorten it and make it smoother. Think about this. Understand how many words. There's a wonderful process in Microsoft Word where you can count the number of characters and the number of words in a document. It's very easy to do. Make sure that you do this on a separate sheet of paper, even if you're doing it online, if you're doing it in print, whichever way you do it. Most of you, I assume, are going to be doing it online. Do it on a separate document so that you can edit yourself down before you get into the form and before you start filling things out. The organization's mission, history, and population served isn't just, meant to be a sleepy little documentation. It is that question. Why are you the best organization? Tell me about you as an organization. Maybe you're brand new. Tell me about yourself then, even in more detail. I want to know your history. I want to know the population served. You can't talk about a long history. Talk about the history of the people that started this organization. Talk about the history of the population that you are serving and what you're doing that nobody else has done. That's very, very important. There's more here. This goes back to what I said earlier about the different elements of the objectives of the Hispanic Fund. Here you see the list of the different choices down there at the bottom. Those are, you have to choose at least one, well, actually, in this case, just one of these. Which one does it fit with the best? And you want to make sure that you do make that selection. Sometimes there's going to be a crossover between one or two, but you have to choose at least one, and you have to be able to say exactly why does it fit within that. Also, make sure you put in the amount requested. I was always shocked with the Stalker Foundation grant requests at how many times I would get a request that had no ask for money in it. It was just, this is what we do. How much do you need? Tell me a little bit more detail. Don't skip anything. Don't miss anything. Now we get into the real meat of this application. The project name, the project start date and end date, and then the description and duration. Tell me what you're going to do and what your strategies are. Specifically, notice the questions that are subheadings within that project description. How many people will be involved and served? Specifically, how long will the project last? Tell me exactly what's going to happen from beginning to end in this. What are you going to try to achieve? And what are your strategies for making this happen? Always a good rule of thumb for any grant application is if you fill in that blank, project description and duration, and then you go back and you look at those specific questions. What will you do? How many people will be involved and served along with the project? If you don't answer all three of those questions, you haven't really filled that in. So you may have to take some beautiful language and tear it apart and add more things in and make sure that that question is answered. but somebody's reading this to make sure that you understand what is involved in making this project work from the beginning to end, and specifically, who is it going to be reaching? Some other things related to the Hispanic Fund application. What specific need are you addressing? I mentioned how important that is. That goes right up into the goals of the project and program. How is this project going to help solve the problem you are addressing in the community? Is it a project that you could replicate? And who does it specifically and intentionally empower and improve? Which part of the Hispanic community? Notice it's only 3,000 characters. These look like large numbers, but really this is not a very long part of your grant proposal. None of these sections are very, very many characters at all. It's tempting to look at that and say, oh, 3,000 words, that's like, I don't know, 10 pages or something like that. No, not 3,000 words, 3,000 characters. Focus on saying this as clearly as possible. Who are you working to help? How does it specifically and intentionally empower and improve the Hispanic community? That's the most important thing here. Make sure that you link to it and make sure that you're clear about exactly, so that if I'm reading about the goal, I understand that that question is answered. I mentioned that who you're working with is definitely something that this project makes important. And you notice the collaborations. How are other individuals or groups working with you in the planning and implementation of this project? Who are they and how will you work together? And notice, it's not just something where we say, well, it'd be really good to work with that group. A letter of support is required from each collaborating partner if applicable. There's a way to upload them. So make sure when you talk about your collaborations, and funders really love when you're working together with somebody. It's not taking away from you to work with somebody else. It means that you are connected to the community as a whole. So don't sell any of that short. But if you are doing something as a collaborating partner, you absolutely have to have a support letter. A few more things and then we'll pause for some questions. I know I see that a few are coming in. The Hispanic Fund application also asks for results and evaluation. If you have an evaluation form, you can upload it as part of your application. But part of this is making sure that you keep track of whether your project was successful and that you measured its success as it went on and also at the end. And though project achievement seems like it's something different, it seems like it's going beyond that into marketing or something like that. The most important thing about a project sometimes is getting the word out about it. How will you let the community know about this? Are you just going to be doing this and measuring it and you'll be happy yourself? And how is it tied into the greater community? How are you letting people know about it? And it can be something as simple as what you are going to do to promote it. It can also be something as simple as how people find out. And maybe people find out through collaborations that you have. So it doesn't mean that if you couldn't include with this 2,000 character limit everything you wanted to say in this section, you might be able to use it in another section. The important thing is answer the questions. How will you determine whether your project was successful? How will you measure results, and so on? Just a little note, I was asked to include this because I think that this is in general what's happening with Community Foundation is a focus more on the idea of outputs and outcomes and measuring success. And I mentioned this earlier, outputs are tangible results, numbers, hours, something that you put a number in front of it and you would describe it. That's an output. But an outcome, which is the most important thing to be able to share, is observable, measurable changes. And when you measure success, you're measuring both the outputs, which is a simpler thing to measure, and then the outcomes, how things are changing. So don't forget about that when you're talking about how you know if you're successful. I don't know if any of you are using a fiscal sponsor, but if you are, there is a section about fiscal sponsorship. I'm not going to talk about it in detail here, but know that fiscal sponsorship is a way that you can apply without having 501c3 status. You can partner with an existing 501c3 organization. So I'm not going to go into detail, but if you have questions about it, please do share them. And then I think I'm going to stop after this particular slide because this is the last part of what we were talking about. How's the project going to sustain itself? Well, you want to know about the budget. You want to know how to talk about how you're going to get money to run this entire project. This is where you are going to share this information. You are also going to share other things that are related to your fiscal operations, like your overall budget and your EIN. Those are standard for attachments that you would include. I think I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to ask Sam to unmute herself and ask me some of the questions that are coming in.
Hi, Dave. Thank you.
Hi, Sam.
Just to clarify, I am answering some of the questions. I'm answering them privately, so then to reduce the number of times that the chat is blinking at everyone. And so in case you don't see me respond to everyone, I'm most likely responding privately. But we do have 2 questions that I think would be good for the group. And the first one are you eligible to apply for multiple grants from the same organization? So if one organization has multiple programs or projects, and I checked and the answer is no. Unfortunately, on this grant cycle, it's only 1 per organization, but that doesn't preclude you from applying for grants to the Lurie Community Foundation or for their other affiliated funds. And
so that's what I understand too. And I'll ask Cindy or someone from the Community Foundation to back me up on that.
Well, we would come back to the Hispanic Fund and make sure that we were addressing all of the requirements that Albert and team have outlined. But then you're absolutely right. You could apply to one of our other community grants, one of our other affiliate funds, or a Lakeland fund, or as you opened, our COVID-19 response fund. So lots of opportunities, but I think it's great for folks that are joining us tonight to really get started with an application process. And I just want to give a shout out to everyone. And David, this has been wonderful. So thank you.
Great.
Yeah, real quickly, and for the Hispanic Fund, you can, if you're one organization, but you have 2 different projects or 2 different, things going on, you can apply for both. And in theory, you can get both. So we encourage you to go ahead and apply. I believe El Centro is one of the organizations in the past where we have funded more than 1 program through them during our grant meetings.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
David, a few other questions for you.
Sure.
On the slide that said the funding limitation excluded transportation, can you explain if that includes paying for transportation to and from activities that are covered? Or is that funding transportation as like a van or some other mode of transportation?
I can't explain it, but I'm going to ask someone from the fund or from the Community Foundation to explain.
Albert.
Yeah, Albert got this.
Albert is still muted.
Let me see if I can unmute him.
How's that?
Yes.
That's better.
Okay, there we go. All right, so typically this is one of those points of contention where we hate not being able to give monies when it's a great project, right? So in the past we've had organizations ask for money for transportation for maybe elderly folks or for children that are involved in some sort of a sports activity to go out to another sports activity, things like that. Unfortunately, our guidelines preclude us from being able to fund the transportation. The money is specifically designed to help an organization create a self-sustaining project. So it's not really for, and I don't want to say wasteful, but I guess for projects that kind of just terminate after its use. So the money really is designed to help an organization sustain a project into the future and not just be used up in a one-time event, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and to add on that, this is where when you get into the portion of an application where you are putting in your budget, it's very important to itemize things as best as possible. because as was mentioned earlier, it's very rare that we will give full funding for the entire program or the full funding of what you're asking for. But with that itemization, it really helps us to figure out, okay, what can we help them out with? Because like Albert has been saying, you know, many of the applications that come in, we really do want to give money. And by itemizing it, you really give us a stronger reason to give you that money.
Mhm.
And I'll show in just a little bit the form that you would use to do the Hispanic Fund application, and it does require that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you both.
I do want to mention, like Marcus just said, the more information, and I'll give an example because there was a question there about the, let me scroll back here, the demographics, if there's specifically a race and or ethnicity requirement for the program. And there is, to the extent that the more information you list in your application about the percentage of the Hispanic Latino population, the more likely we're to give you funding for your project. So if you have, and I'll use the free clinic for example. When they apply, they do an amazing job. The free clinic is such a worthwhile organization in the community. And when they apply, they actually give us percentage breakdowns of, you know, if they have 500 patients that, you know, 37% of their patients are Hispanic Latino descent. And so they're able to break it down into categories, you know, African Americans and Latinos and white. And so that really gives us a really good indication of how effective they are within the Hispanic Latino community. So we're more likely to give monies to those more quickly because they're giving us such great detailed information.
And if I can add on to that, like Albert said, they're 1 year, they're very specific, 22%, and they're a big organization. They got lots of money, but they still need a lot of help. The 1 year they said 22% of those that they serve were Latino, and they literally asked for 22% of their operating and things like that, and we gave it to them. Last year, this past grant cycle, we had an applicant. It was a great program. At the beginning, I think we were leaning towards giving them money, but as we dug a little deeper, it was very unclear on the demographic that was going to be served. It was very unclear, okay, how many Latinos are going to be in this program, you know? And for that reason, they didn't get funding. It wasn't because it wasn't a great program. We thought it was, but we were unclear where the money was going to be going.
Mhm. Thank you for jumping in, Albert and Marcus. Dave, that's all of our questions for now.
Okay, I'm going to go back and finish off the presentation, and then if you do have questions, please do share them through the chat. All right, everybody's muted again. And so I'm going to move on from here to talk about some of the things that you should consider when you are putting your budget together. So we mentioned a little bit there about itemizing, and you're getting some good information about that. Remember that everything you put into your grant proposal that you were asking for, your budget is just the numerical representation of that. It should be a mirror of what's in your proposal. So if you need to hire staff, if you need to buy equipment, everything that's in your proposal should be represented in your budget, every expense, and the sources of income as well, but I'll mention that in a second. If you're estimating, remember that this is for the future. You don't necessarily know, but make sure you keep track of all the people that are going to be working directly on your project. When you do a project request, you have to be able to list out the specifics of the people who are working on the project, how much time they're dedicating to it, you know, if it's 5 hours a week or full time or half time, 3% of their time, whatever it is, you have to make sure that you keep track of who's doing it, how much time they're dedicating, and what are their salaries. So if they're only working 3 hours a week, you want to include the salary, but just 3 hours of that salary per week for the number of time that they're doing it. Then if they have any additional expenses that you're paying that are related to it, like fringe benefits, you want to add that in based on what your fringe benefit rate is for your organization. Different for all of them. What you're trying to get at is the real total cost of the people that are working for you, that are working specifically on this project. In the same way, if you have to have personnel, non-personnel expenses, if you have to buy food and beverage, if you have travel, if the non-personal expenses that you have fit within the request, you can put them in there. Now, here's the question that I'm going to anticipate. You saw that list of things that the grant proposal does not pay for. Well, what if they are things that you have to buy? That doesn't mean that they're not part of your budget. It just means that you have to make it very clear when you make your request that none of the funds that you're asking for from the Hispanic Fund are going to be used for that. And the form that the Hispanic Fund uses actually makes it very easy to do that. But make sure you have a clear idea of what things cost. Don't just guess. Don't use something like, well, we're going to buy computers. What do they cost? Just make it $5,000 each. Don't do something like that. Make sure it's clear. Get some estimates from different places. Go to Amazon, go to another place where you're going to buy things, and get a sense of what the thing is going to cost. And be real about it. Don't try and lowball the whole thing. If it's going to cost more because it needs to be more powerful or it needs to be bigger or whatever makes it better, share that real cost, because that's what somebody's going to want to know. They're going to want to know if you have to hire somebody outside, like a consultant. They're going to want to know when you say travel, exactly what that means. How does that work into the project? And again, as you heard from Albert sharing, it depends on the situation. You should also show your income, and this is just a way to do it, but you'll have a form which you do that. But keep track of all the different ways that this program is going to be supported, including things like using your own membership dues to pay for things, or using in-kind support. If somebody donates computers instead of you're having to buy them, that's contributing to the project if your project needs computers. The other financial information that you always have to share are usually things like this. Most of the time, it's the organizational-wide budget. Sometimes anything else that will contribute, follow the directions based on the guidelines. Don't go outside of that too much. But if you need to explain something, that little line there that says budget narrative, that's vital. Because as you see, this is a little part of the Hispanic Fund's application budget. Has basic information. What is the item that you need? People first and personnel first and non-personnel second. First column A is how much you're requesting from the Hispanic Fund for this. And the second column is where you're going to get it from your other funders. Third, from your agency, how much you're contributing. And then what is the total cost, the total proposed budget. The notes and the budget narrative there at the end. Please elaborate on any line items that are not self-explanatory. There's nothing that makes people more suspicious than seeing a line like other or extras, miscellaneous. Don't ever do that without explaining it. Make sure it's clear. And usually you don't have to say other. You can say different categories, travel, food, other expenses, rent, utilities. Tell me what it is. Notice there that if there are things that you need to get, but the Hispanic Fund generally does not pay for it, that doesn't mean that you can't put that in that budget, just as listing it from yourself or from other funders. I think this is a wonderful one-page budget. I may use this as an example to other organizations to just make it as clear as possible, because it really forces you to think about not only what you're going to get from the Hispanic Fund or whoever you're asking, but exactly what you're going to spend your money on and where else you might get the money for. The rest of the Hispanic Fund application is pretty straightforward. Two things that I should mention. The current board of directors is always asked for from just about any organization. Make sure you mention the officer titles and years served. This is vitally important to make sure that you're not just coming at this without working with the rest of the community. And the authorization to apply, the board of directors support, is vital. If you've ever worked for an organization where your board of directors and your president don't get along, that means a project isn't going to happen. It means things don't work the way they're supposed to. So this is why that additional information is in there. I think this is a pretty straightforward application. I'm going to make sure I share this PowerPoint by recording this so that you will have a way to refer to it if you want to see it. You can, of course, get information from the Community Foundation. That's the Community Foundation's website. And I hear from Cindy that the website is going to be changing soon, so I don't want to show you exactly the link to the Hispanic Fund application. But it is there in their affiliate funds list right from the homepage, so you can get that. And then, of course, if you have questions for the Community Foundation staff, you can call Rachel and she will connect you to the person who can help you, or you can send an email to her. The other thing down there is not specifically to this application, but it's to any application. I'm going to stop sharing right now and I'm going to share again a website. So this is the Community Foundation's website. Currently, this is where the link to the affiliate fund grants are. It's down below, but it may be changing soon. I want to show you this website. This is a free website called Grant Space that Candid has put together. It has a lot of different things in it. But one of the things that I think might be helpful to you, especially if you haven't written grant proposals before, you're not as confident about it, there's a section over here of resources. Grantspace.org is a free website. You can get to it from anywhere that you have internet access. And it has a section of sample documents, meaning sample budgets, sample cover letters, sample letter applications, sample full proposals that you can use to see some of the language that's used. You don't want to copy it, of course, but you want to see how did another person maybe put this together in a useful way. The other thing that's in here, in addition to trainings on budgeting and writing grant proposals, go into a lot more detail. The other thing that's in here in the resources section is a knowledge base, which is essentially a place to get your questions answered. So if you have a question that asks about budgeting and you want to look up some of the other resources that might answer that question, you can find them by just searching that term. And if you see, there's a little Ask Us on this page up at the top right all the time. If you have a question and you feel like you can't, it's not a question specifically to the Hispanic Fund grant, but it is to something more broad about finding grant opportunities or what's the best process for doing something or working with your board, anything related to nonprofits, you can always ask us. We have chat reference all day long and then email reference overnight, which we respond to immediately in the morning. I mentioned also that we have a coronavirus website, candid.org/coronavirus, if you want to get to it, that has specific funding opportunities recently listed for organizations working within COVID. There's also a full list of all the different funds that we know about nationally for coronavirus relief, and it's organized in a way that you can search by the location you're in. You can do United States, you can do countries, but look at your county or your region in this. So I'm going to stop sharing again. I'm going to go back to the page here that I was on before. And then I'm going to ask Sam if there are any questions. Or I'm also going to ask Sam to talk about the Funding Information Network that we have in Lorain County.
Thank you, Dave. In Lorain County, we're lucky to have 3 partners that are committed to dedicating to giving the resources to the nonprofits locally. You have the Lorain Public Library on 6th Street, the North Ridgeville branch, and the Lorain Community College, the library itself. So generally when these organizations are open, right now unfortunately they are temporarily closed, you can go into the organization, you can access our funding directory online. You can also access our grants to individuals online, which is our database for those that are seeking grants that are not affiliated with the 501c3 or nonprofit. So you'd have access to both of those databases, and you would also have access to someone on staff who can help answer your questions. We're lucky to have, it looks like Mr. Lewis from the library joining us right now. And we are very lucky because the Lorain County Public Library has generously extended their access so you can access the remote database at home. And so right now in the chat, I'm going to share the link. And with this link, you can access the foundation directory online from home. So if you do need additional resources or you do need to prospect above and beyond what is available at the local funds of the Lorraine Community Foundation, you can use this to help you during this time. Keep in mind that this will only be active and eligible to be used at home while the library is closed. Once the library reopens, you will be able to go in and get assistance in person. So keep an eye on the library's website for when they're planning on reopening.
Great, thanks, Sam. Any other questions that came in?
No. Oh wait, yes, I'm sorry. Can you please discuss how the agency's budget is used to determine whether or not the grant would be approved or not?
How the agency's budget. I don't know exactly how it would be analyzed by the people who decide about this particular grant. Generally, it's used to see if what you're working on and the project that you are asking for money to support fits within that agency's budget. It's something that you have accounted for. The overall agency's budget is also a good way for somebody to evaluate an organization and to say, well, it looks like they are spending their money in a reasonable way. I understand how they partition their money and they run their different programs. I understand their issues. A lot of the times it is something that is related to understanding how well the money is going to be managed and invested. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything that's related to that, specifically related to Hispanic Fund or Community Foundation. Throw that open.
I can add something.
Sure.
So the Hispanic Fund, we typically go through a two-step process. Earlier, the guidelines were mentioned and what we look for, what we don't look for, if you're approved or not. And we basically tell ourselves as a committee, all right, do we want to give this organization money? If the answer is yes, then we will typically throw a small dollar amount in there and we'll move on to the next application. Do we want to give this organization money? And we do that through all the applicants. That's the first step. So if you're approved, we're most likely going to give you something. And after that is the second tier where we really look at, okay, how much are they asking for? What do we want to give them that amount? And we, typically we'll have anywhere between 18 and 20 something, $22,000 a year. So we try our best to max that money out and divvy it up amongst all the people that we agree to give money to on that first tier.
All right, thank you. That's a great addition.
Yeah, the one thing I'd like to add is, so while there are organizations that are fairly large that have applied in the past, and so let's just use an example, a hypothetical. If a small organization in the community that's very local and is just in Lorain County and doesn't exist anywhere else applies for a grant, and they have all the information necessary, and then a large organization applies for a grant that has a multitude of ways to receive grant funding from larger grant requests. We typically will donate to the smaller organization only because they have less of a footprint anywhere else and mostly in Lorain. So that's kind of a big factor, even though at times, we'll have some of the larger organizations that are not only in Lorain County, but they're in the adjacent counties, out in Erie County and Cuyahoga County. They have a footprint in those areas, but they do exist in Lorain. So we'll typically give to the Lorain County-based organizations because that's exactly who we're focusing on is the population, the Hispanic Latino population of Lorain County. So I did want to add that.
All right, thank you very much, Albert. Anything else that has come in, Sam?
No, not at this time. If you would not like to ask your question aloud, you can always send it directly to me or to Dave or email one of us after the presentation if you have questions later on. Yeah,
and that goes for the Community Foundation as well. I think this is a great opportunity. I'm so glad that some of the decision makers from the Hispanic Fund were able to make it to this presentation because that's what you want. You want to be able to talk to somebody and ask them questions directly about how do they make their decisions? Because you never really know. It's sometimes a little bit, it seems like it's behind a wall, but not in this case. It's very open, and I'm so glad that I was able to do this program with you guys. I am going to, thank you, Reagan. I'm going to end this pretty soon here, unless there's anything else that we want to add.
David, I just wanted to make a comment. Yeah, this was extremely informational. Thank you for leading this this conversation today. I think it's given a lot of folks some good information, and you know, now that I've seen this, this may be a good way to do this again in the future somehow, even after this quarantine lifts, right? So a lot of folks don't have time to drive in from work, you know, if they're driving a half hour, 45 minutes or an hour, but they could probably pick this up once they get home and you know, connect and learn things. So this would be a fantastic way to promote the grants cycle again.
Terrific. Well, glad to hear it. And I'm going to go ahead and finish up here. I'm going to save the recording, and then it's going to take a little while to process, but then I'll send it to the Community Foundation. But I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you very much.
Before you close, if I may, I just wanted to let you know that the application for the Hispanic Fund is open now, and application deadline is May 31st.
Okay, sorry for that. Let me see. Sorry for that extra noise there, I think. But just in case you didn't catch that, the application's deadline is May 31st. And Rachel, was there anything else that you wanted to add to that? I can go ahead and unmute you again.
We're good. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody. All have a good night and stay safe. See you now.
You as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Rachel and Cindy.
Thank you all.
Absolutely. Have a good night. Be well.
Thank you.